questions from the audience, I wanted to provide an opportunity for Phil to share the answer to a question that he was asked yesterday. And yesterday, in amongst the training session, the emergency scenario that we ran, one of the questions that he was asked was, but first aid is tricky in a theatre setting. How do you deal with somebody who's fainted in the aisles? Because they don't faint in convenient places. Phil?
Thank you, Jodie. So, yeah, as we explained to the lady yesterday, one of the things with first aid is it needs to be safe for you and safe for the person. There's no point starting out as trying to be someone's rescue and end up needing to be rescued yourself. The aims of first aid, obviously, are to preserve life, to promote recovery, and to prevent the condition getting worse. We can't do that if we can't access the person. So if someone has collapsed within the aisles and everything else, we have to move them. Regardless, we can't deliver the first aid without moving them. So taking that into consideration, the ideal thing is to move them into the walkway where we can actually get full access and actually be able to help them in the way that they should be doing it.
Thank you, Phil. I think it's fair to say that the people from the theatre who heard that response were suitably impressed because they could tell that Phil spoke from experience of having worked with theatres already. Are there any questions from the audience?
Okay, so I work for a local authority and I'm very involved in elections. So I'm thinking like polling stations on polling day. Obviously, they're held in community centres and places that have these capacities for a lot of members of the public all at the same time. Who would be responsible for delivering the training, the risk assessments, everything that would make it Martyn's Law compliant? So whose responsibility would that be? Would it be the returning officer? Is it the owner of the premises? So where would that sit?
Okay, so first of all, there will be a requirement to determine whether the premises themselves are in scope. So if you're talking about a polling station, it will depend on how many people can be accommodated. And there are different ways of calculating the number. That number may be calculated via the number of people that can fit in the building according to fire risk assessments, or it might be based on how many people are ticketed to be in the space at a time. There's actually guidance on it, and for anyone that's interested, we do have a free webinar advertised in April that will take you through the different steps that are published in the government guidance.
Having reflected on the answer that I gave in relation to the question about who is responsible for the premises, it dawned on me that I'd only half answered the question. It is true to say that it will depend on how many people and whether or not it falls in scope. But let's assume the premises are in scope. What the draft legislation currently says is that the responsible person is whoever controls the premises as per their Schedule 1 use. So taking Jane's very specific example of a council with a polling station. If it's the council that owns the premises and those premises have more than 200 people in, then those premises will be in scope. Well, sometimes it's less clear. So I've taken guidance from other legislation. So, for instance, the fire safety order defines whoever controls the premises as being if it's a workplace, that would typically be the employer. But sometimes, let's say now the council has hired, say, a sports stadium for use with the elections. Then, instead of it being the council that's responsible, it would be whomever looks after the stadium, whomever is responsible for that stadium premises. I hope that helps to make it a little bit clearer, and I'm sorry I missed it from my original answer.
If there's no questions from the audience at the moment, I'll move next to a question that was put to Andy previously. And that was, quite simply, do you need to have a plan for everything that can go wrong?
Thank you, Jody. Yeah, it's an understandable question when you talk about crisis management. I'm saying you need to think about crises, you need to plan for them. But as I demonstrated in the presentation this morning, some things you're just not going to think about. And I gave the example of a jeweler from a jewelry family who basically went totally off course, made a joke about the quality of his products, thinking he was being funny, and that cost his company £500 million in its stock exchange value. You're never going to have a plan for the CEO going mad. But, well, you might do, but what you can do is have a plan for a PR crisis. And then that acts, if you like, as a framework. Once you've got that framework in place, then you look at the incident itself and you adjust the plan to suit. The plan's acting as a framework, a skeleton, is giving you a list of things to think about, and then you can adjust your response accordingly, because no two incidents are the same. So, no, you cannot have a plan for everything. That's not going to happen in the real world. But if you've got plans to cover the main things that can go wrong, at least if something does happen, you've got a starting point, and then you can adjust your response as the situation develops. So I hope that clears that one up. Anybody else questions on crisis management while I've got the microphone? No? Okay, I'll hand back to Jody.
Thank you, Andy. If there's no other questions at the moment, I do have something to put to Alice. Now, if you've been wandering around the showground today, you may well have seen, or rather heard, her rather noisy communications device. It's quite brilliant, but not everybody can hear. So I've heard somebody ask Alice recently, how do you communicate how do you communicate an alarm to those who cannot hear?
That's a really good question. So it's factoring in all the needs of the individual or individuals when you're actually building a plan for emergencies. And it's thinking outside the box a little bit. And we actually fashioned a webinar so we could understand all of those needs and requirements of different individuals. So when it comes to maybe people who are hard of hearing, people who might be SEND or on the spectrum, we have to make considerations of how they'll react when there's an alarm that goes off. So we can do things like visual alerts, you can have lights, you can have beacons, there's lots of different things you can take into consideration when thinking about how to evolve this plan. There's also things which can take over messaging screens, so when staff are actually going through their normal day-to-day job, it will take over everything they're doing and tell them exactly what they need to do as next steps. So there's lots of different ideas.
Fantastic, thank you, Alice. Were there any more questions from the audience? If there are no more questions, if there's no more questions right now, you will find us in the Protect Zone at the back of the venue. Or for those of you who've collected your orange packets, you've got our contact details in there. You will find details of further upcoming free events. And please follow us on LinkedIn, because we do try and share relevant stories from different aspects that will have a relevance to Martin's Law on there. Thank you, everybody, for being in the audience today.